Let's bring in Rob Staton, our good friend from across the pond, but covers the Seattle Seahawks as closely as anybody out there, SeahawksDraftBlog.com. Rob, for you, and I saw you tweeting about it a little bit, but for those who have not seen it, did this come as a surprise to you, or did you feel like this had been in the works here for a little while?
No, I think the tea leaves were suggesting that there was something going on here, because even though the Washington Huskies were in a college football national championship game on Monday, which was going to always move Pete Carroll's end of season press conference to a different day, because a lot of the reporters were covering that. The fact that it didn't happen on Tuesday and then was not scheduled to happen on Wednesday suggested that something was going on. And there were, speaking to different people behind the scenes, it was whether or not this was a delay because they were going to fire coordinators and then have the press conference, or it was believed that there may be a small chance that Pete Carroll was going to go. So anticipating that some news was coming, but it was still a shock to see it. When you actually see those words pop up on social media, Pete Carroll is no longer the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. It was huge news. It's big news for the Seahawks franchise. He's been in charge for 14 years, and a lot of people were surprised by this decision.
One of only three to win a college national championship and a Super Bowl.
Jimmy Johnson,
yeah,
Barry Switzer,
yeah, and Carroll.
Right.
In that order. Rob, what are your thoughts now on where Seattle goes for their next head coach? I know Dan Quinn is the name, hotly rumored, former defensive coordinator and current defensive coordinator for Seattle and the current defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys. Do you feel they will call Dan Quinn? And if not, who else might be in the running?
It's inevitable that Dan Quinn will have an interview with the Seahawks, or at least a request will go in to speak to Dan Quinn. He's very well respected within the Seahawks franchise. He's got a lot of time for Seattle, and I think it is a natural fit. But the other thing is if you're the Seahawks franchise, and they're not tied to continuity candidates just because Dan Quinn used to be here, you have to look across the board and see who else is out there. That's one thing. So it needs to be a broad search, and by all accounts, it seems that they are going to speak to multiple people, and they are going to have a proper search here with numerous interviews. The thing you've got to remember with Dan Quinn is he got the Atlanta Falcons to a Super Bowl thanks to Kyle Shanahan making Matt Ryan the MVP. His defense was very average during his time with the Atlanta Falcons, and then once Shanahan had gone to take the 49ers job, he was 24-29 as a head coach. So you've got to be wary of that. He's had a lot of success in Dallas, but how much is that down to Micah Parsons? So very well respected, a good, strong candidate, but they'll want to speak to other people. I personally would like to see them interview Ben Johnson. He's done a lot of good work with Jared Goff. If he's going to have to work with Geno Smith next year, they're similar quarterbacks. The Seahawks have invested a lot in their running backs. Look what he's done with the two running backs in Detroit. They've got a lot of production out of those guys. Amon-Ra St. Brown's been fantastic. The Seahawks need someone who can get a lot more out of their receivers. Sam Laporta's had a great rookie season. So I think Ben Johnson would be someone that you would imagine they'd want to speak to. Mike Macdonald, the Ravens head coach, inherited a defense that was the 28th best in the league. And 2 years later, they're the number one ranked defense in the league. And the Seahawks have just not been good enough on defense. So if you want someone who's going to transform that side of the ball, someone who's actually gone into San Francisco and beaten the Niners in the last few weeks as well, he would be a good candidate. And then I'd mention Bob Slowik as well, who seems like a rising star for the Texans, has done a great job with C.J. Stroud. The Seahawks are likely to draft a quarterback in the near future. So he would be a good candidate to come in. He's from that Shanahan, McVay sort of coaching history. He's worked with both of those guys before. So why not fight fire with fire, guys, and go and get someone very similar to them?
We're talking to our good friend Rob Staton, SeahawksDraftBlog.com. It'll before we know it, it'll be draft season. We'll be talking to Rob quite a bit. But, everywhere you look, Rob, people are talking about Ben Johnson, the Lions offensive coordinator. Jim Harbaugh is a highly sought-after commodity. Mike Vrabel. But there's going to, at this point, a lot of these coaches are going to get to be choosy. So based off of the talent that's on the roster, the makeup of that division with San Francisco there, the cap space, tell us where Seattle, in your opinion, ranks of the openings with Carolina, Tennessee, Atlanta, Washington, Las Vegas, and the Chargers also open currently.
First thing you've got to say, ownership is willing to spend, and they are willing to do what it takes to win. If that means trading for Jamal Adams and paying him a huge salary, they'll do it. If it means sanctioning the GM to trade Russell Wilson, they will do it. They will do anything to make this team successful, even taking the decision to fire Pete Carroll, which is essentially what they've done today. They are striving for glory. So that's the first thing, ownership situation, pretty good in that regard. Second thing, the facility is unbelievable. Anybody who's been to Renton and seen the practice facility, it's incredible. Washington State is a great place to live. So as long as you don't mind a bit of rain and a bit of cold, then it's a great place to go and play. In terms of the team, if you're an offensive-minded head coach, can I tempt you with DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Tyler Lockett, Ken Walker, Zach Charbonnet, and Geno Smith? In fairness, you could do a lot worse than Geno Smith, and there's the potential to draft a quarterback as well. So there's talent to work with on the offense. So I think there's a lot of things that are appealing. There are things that you're going to have to consider as well in terms of the defense needs a bit of a reset. They're going to have to cut some players to save some money. At the moment, they are in the red for effective cap space for next year, so they're not going to be able to go and splurge. They don't have multiple first-round picks. They don't have a second-round pick because they traded that away for Leonard Williams. So there are definitely things that will make the Seahawks less appealing than maybe some other teams. If you're a coach, for example, that thinks, okay, I want to go in there with a top-drafted quarterback and start afresh, then the Washington Commanders would be an appealing job, perhaps. If you want to go somewhere that has, in fairness, had a history of winning, it's not just with Pete Carroll. Before that, Mike Holmgren was very successful as well, has got all of the facilities that you are not going to want for any kind of financial help from ownership, then this is a good job to have. The only thing you've also got to remember here, though, is you're going to have to compete with Kyle Shanahan and the San Francisco 49ers and Sean McVay and the LA Rams, which, all right, it might not be taking on peak Mahomes and the Chiefs or some of these other comparisons in other divisions, but that's a really tough ask. But I don't think anybody will be that daunted by that. It's a really good job.
All right, Rob, the Seahawks played 5 of the 7 NFC qualifiers for the playoffs. 2 of them meet in Detroit on Sunday night, with the Lions hosting the Rams, laying 3 points. Give us a preview of that game.
Well, the Seahawks have played Detroit the last 2 years, and they beat them both times in Detroit. And when you look at the Lions, they to me are quite an unpredictable team. Would you be really surprised if they just came out firing on all cylinders and just blew away the Rams? And let's not forget, the Rams, they've had some iffy performances this year. Not a lot was expected of them. It's a little bit of a surprise that they've ended up winning as many games as they have and qualifying for the playoffs in what was seen as a bit of a reset year. So you could easily imagine Detroit coming out, great home crowd who are going to be really up for this, and you could just imagine them winning the game. But then I would never, ever bet against Sean McVay, Aaron Donald, and in fairness, Matt Stafford. Because these three, and with some of the other, Puka Nacua and with Cooper Kupp, they have shown that they can take on opponents. And I have to say, if there's one team in the NFC that I think could give the Niners a game, it's probably the Rams. I don't think the Niners would lose to the Rams, but out of all the teams that could perhaps go and beat Kyle Shanahan and his team, I think LA would give San Francisco the biggest problem. So it could go either way, but I would never bet against Sean McVay and the Rams.
Rob, great stuff, man. We appreciate you jumping on to give us the latest on what's going on with the Seahawks. And as we get closer to the draft, we'll certainly be picking your brain.
Thanks, guys. Anytime. My pleasure.
There he is. SeahawksDraftBlog.com.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.